Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we could make a start. And the first thing is just to tell people that this will be streamed live on the internet. So if anybody doesn't want their picture being on, particularly members of the public, could you please let the committee clerk know who's sat over there? That's great. And could I welcome everybody, and particularly the new members of the committee, and at the same time record thanks to the people that have left the council committees for the service in the last year anyway, and previous years. I think that will be helpful. If we move to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is election of vice chair, could I move Councillor Surgeon?
Yeah.
Is that seconded?
Second, yeah.
Are we all agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. The next item is apologies for absence.
We've received apologies from Councillor F. Hussain and Clint Vivian.
Thank you. The next item is declaration of interest. I've got a declaration, a non-registrable interest at item 8, so I won't be taking that item and I'll leave the room, mainly because I live adjacent to the particular property in question. Okay, has anybody else got any declarations of interest at all? No. No? Thanks very much indeed. Public questions? Have we received? Right, no questions. The minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated, I'll move them as a correct record. And Councillor Surgeon will second them, I'm sure.
Is this the one from April?
Yeah.
I wasn't here.
Oh,
Chair,
that's
sorry.
a shame.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any questions or observations on them? No. Thanks very much indeed. If we then move on to the first substantive item on the agenda in planning terms, and that's conversion and work, significant work at Spindles and Town Square Shopping Centre. And, sorry.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. On Monday night, I was busy, but we had the planning training, and I was told that we couldn't attend the planning committee meetings if we'd not attended the training on Monday. But there are some councillors here that didn't attend the training.
I think
that are now attending the committee.
I think that what we've done is circumvented that. Peter, the head of planning, sent emails out today with an instruction for people that were attending that didn't attend on Monday to actually read all the presentation. And we're accepting that really, because I think that we'd be in difficulties if we didn't.
Well, we could, but that could have been extended to me.
Yeah, sorry.
So just to add to that, if I may as well, I mean, just to clarify, it's a grace period for this one committee, in the sense of often it's very soon after the annual council, short notice for the training. So on this one occasion, for this one committee, as I say, we've sent around the PowerPoint presentation, asked those who weren't there to read it, and we'll arrange further training for those who couldn't make it before the next committee.
Councillor Gloucester. I mean, it's just unfortunate, but we don't want to take anybody's rights away from attending a meeting which they've actually been nominated to. So we've tried our best to make sure that people have got the full information before them to make appropriate decisions. Okay. If we then move on to, which we already have done to some degree, Spindles and Town Square Shopping Centre, High Street, Oldham, which is a comprehensive redevelopment of the buildings and structure. And if I could ask Mr. Dickman to outline the application.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is a site that members will be well aware of and obviously should know in some detail. So obviously, quite often we provide you with pictures of existing sites and so on. We'll keep that down to a minimum today. Essentially, There are a couple of main elements to this, but the principle of what's being trying to be achieved is the same. The two main elements are to look at the existing main shopping centre, so these are the two parts of the Spindles and Town Square, and to repurpose those, partly to ensure that space within them is utilised in the most efficient way, and also to look more in a wider sense of what facilities can be provided within this more compact centre, which then allows for redevelopment opportunities and regeneration elsewhere in the town centre. So essentially some of the elements are about conversion or reuse of the existing buildings. The one element which is slightly different is the area of the TJU store alongside Parliament Square, on which permission's already been granted for demolition, and that will be a replacement building on there which will then be repurposed primarily with an events space, allowing for part of the market and for a food and beverage market area, and also with benefits which hopefully you'll see from the slides for Parliament Square itself and for enlivening that area of the town centre. So the first one, obvious one, you all know where that section is. And again, you can see the extent of the buildings, quite comprehensive, but on the... Peter told me about this, being able to use this. I never realised you couldn't see what I was showing you. This area is the area the TJ use, so this is the area to be demolished and rebuilt. But the remaining area of the buildings will all be retained. There'll be some alterations again, which you'll see some pictures of, to the elevations within there, but it's primarily internal changes. So I've done this, called this sections proposals map, and I don't know how clear it actually is. There's three elements. So on the left-hand side, you've got this section of the building. The main change here is to utilise upper floor sections of this building for office accommodation, and some elements of that are for the council's offices themselves, but also to provide some more modern office facilities for business which can operate in a more generic way. The ground floor primarily retained as the retail space which you have at the moment. The second area we'll then come on to is this area in the middle. Again, this is primarily an area which is retail at present and will be retained as retail, with the links through still being provided in that area. On the basement area, on part of the section of the car park, there will be a new archive section, and again I'll show you some details of that. And then the third section on the right hand side, this is the area of the rebuild, and again we'll go into more details shortly. Again, obviously quite difficult to be able to see this, but it's just really reiterating the point that I've previously made. So again, this is the lower mall, and essentially retail units of various sizes be retained, repurposing there. Obviously some of the retail units that are on the upper floors at the moment, they'll be given accommodation down in these spaces as well. Again, difficult to see, but you're looking again at the office areas and the accommodation that will be provided within those spaces. And this is just to give an indicative indication of how those spaces should look. Some elements of obviously new fenestration will be required and new lighting to get improved conditions within these areas of the building. Again, you'll know what this is like, but essentially they're fairly minor, but will enhance the elevations at the moment. There are a couple of versions that just show those out of order. That's 2 of 2, and now 1 of 2. Again, back to the section proposal map. So now moving on to the central section. And all this is really showing you is that within the car parking area, an element of that will be repurposed to provide an archive section, which will be a much improved facility. There'll be access for the public on appointment to some of these areas. There will be a loss of car parking within part of the car park, but the transport assessment has indicated that based on the projected demands for car parking and on the basis of surveys that have already been carried out of current usage, that there will remain more than adequate car parking provision. And of course that's alongside the fact that the encouragement is to stop people wanting to come into the town centre using their cars, and clearly the main advantage of this site is its proximity to major transport hubs, particularly the tram stop on Union Street and obviously the bus station as well. And the third area on the right hand side, and this is the one that's going to change, should we say, most specifically. So in the left hand section, this is effectively the area for the new market, or I say new market, effectively for the relocation of the existing market space. That will be linked in on a lower level to an area which again is a repurpose of the existing market space, but with new provision for food and drink. So for instance, at the moment, as we know, the existing market closes at 6 o'clock at night. This will allow for more activity into the evening, as will an area of an event space, which will provide a changing facility for maybe music events, other kinds of facilities. So you have the space. Anybody's been somewhere like the Met in Bury, so it can reconform itself internally for different types of opportunities. And that's obviously something that the town centre is lacking largely at the present occasion. These are just giving you the upper and lower levels in a little bit more detail, but perhaps the images are going to be better. Not immediately proposed, but again, facility for a roof terrace area would also be provided on the part of the new building. These are the just images, so these are again showing the indicative. So the one on the left hand side would show the area as you come down. So you would link through from this space into the existing shopping centre. So the provision that you get at the moment, which as you get towards Parliament Square becomes a little bit uninviting as you push down a narrow passageway, you'll be able to emerge straight through onto Parliament Square, which should be a major enhancement for that area. And again, the other major enhancement, as you can see, obviously the redevelopment of the Old Town Hall has managed to open up some of these spaces and bring some life in, but you still have to say this area is pretty uninspiring, because along one side there is nothing. There's nothing of interest to the area, and to bring more life into this area, there's obviously an intention to open up those spaces, and this will be provided in this kind of arrangement. Obviously, have some implications, but again, you open this area up. There could be some outdoor eating, drinking areas provided as part of this provision. Again, something on that side of the square which is not available at the moment. As you come round, there's a ground floor entrance to the event space, but also links through into this space internally within the site, and with some again improvements to the rather bland elevational treatment that's there at the present time. And again, obviously, this gives you hopefully an indication of how more inviting that area is likely to become as a result. So in terms of policy issues, see the site is within the town centre. Policy 15 of the existing core strategy supports any proposals which advance the town centre, which improve its commercial offer, but also we have to be aware of the changes in commercial activity, particularly retail. You only have to wander around, or say last year or whenever, around the town centre, around the Tommyfield Market, and see the vacancies that are within this area and the lack of attraction that gives to people having to cross the town. This facility is aimed to improve that, and therefore, although it doesn't strictly conform to the wording of that policy, which was more retail orientated in particular frontages, it does take account of the way the market has moved on, the way people's entertainment requirements and so forth have moved on, and therefore there is no in principle change there. Another change which has occurred is in national policy, and particularly in the use classes order, and the introduction of Class E, which brings together retail, food and drink type activities, office accommodation, day nurseries, various other kinds of specialist facilities which are appropriate to a town centre, all under the same class. So what this means, for instance, is that although within the shopping centre itself you're taking away some retail space for office space, that element, in fact, in isolation doesn't require planning permission. So that could have occurred, but as part of the whole package, it obviously is an important element of the scheme. I've already mentioned there's a transport assessment submitted with the application, and that's looked at car parking, the impact on car parking, but obviously the future benefits for the town centre and its accessibility to various means of transport. There is a condition, you will notice, for a travel plan as part of that, as part of the approval as well. So this isn't just a one-off. This is to look continually at how the shopping centre can improve, how the office accommodation improve, and we can encourage people to use more sustainable modes of transport. In terms of heritage issues, and on this view you can see just on the left-hand side, you've got areas of the conservation area, obviously areas of the conservation area on the opposite side as well. Again, this will be an improvement to those areas. The current uninspiring finishes to these obviously don't enhance those areas. There's no new building, if you like, beyond existing footplate of existing buildings. So again, there's no greater impact from that perspective. So again, we're satisfied that in terms of the conservation area, in terms of listed buildings in the vicinity of the site, that there will be less than substantial harm, which implies harm. But in reality, what that means is that there is some impact, but that impact is one where you weigh up the benefits of the development, and in terms of the advantages to the town centre and potential improvements to the town centre, it's considered that the heritage impact will be acceptable. In terms of energy provision, policy 18 of the existing core strategy requires improvements to energy efficiency, and as part of this scheme there is a proposal immediately for improvements in terms of PV, solar energy being provided, and for other opportunities for electric vehicle charging within the car parking area and so forth, and also for adaptation of the roof space for future technologies, if you like, as they come forward. So again, we're satisfied there's a condition that relates to that and those measures being put in place, that it satisfies those elements. You look at other aspects which are to do with drainage of the site, land, ground conditions and so forth. Again, members will note that there are conditions for the final details, but all the statutory undertakers who raised issues initially for more information are satisfied that subject to those conditions, the application can move forward. So just in conclusion, this is obviously a clearly positive development for the town centre. There are no issues in terms of current planning policies where the benefits outweigh any strict conflict with the wording of those. The conditions that we're recommending obviously provide for other details that still need to come forward, and therefore we'd recommend members approve in accordance with those conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Dickman. Has anybody got any questions of the presentation? Councillor Alan Downey.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the policy 15, and you've said it's not in sort of strict alignment with the exact wording, which is 70% ground floor frontage for A1, A2 and A3. There's no indication given of sort of what actually does remain in use. And you talked about it kind of Class E instead. Does it go over 70% when you include that, or just if you could give me a better breakdown of that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have the breakdown. The issue with the 70%, if you like, the policy has been superseded by events. So the introduction of Class E actually allows existing retail uses to non-retail uses without the need for planning permission. So in a way, the policy is not of its time. It doesn't serve the same purpose that it would have done at one time, because you look, well, here's your main street frontage. If you, people were going along there, they go one shop to the next. If you introduce other elements into that, it becomes less attractive, becomes less enticing. But of course, as the market has changed and town centres have found you get vacancies in those areas, what do? Do you wait for a retail business to come back in and do that? And I think we know that the market isn't necessarily there to do that. Or do you repurpose it for something that doesn't detract from that, and in fact probably relates to what people now visit town centres for? It's leisure, fitness, these kind of things. So I haven't got the figure you need, but to be honest, I don't think it's something that's necessary to define the policy. It's looking at what are the current circumstances, and does the change that's taking place conflict with that. And I think the other important thing is that where we're losing retail space, it's the upper floors of the mall. So effectively, you can still do that route through. At the moment, you go through that, well, at the moment, obviously, business has been moving out, but say you went through there 12, 18 months ago, you'll notice the gaps are in there. So people don't go there, because unless you go into a specific shop. Whereas when that's all combined together on the ground floor area, and then of course you've got the market where you currently have to go to a different building, not far, but in terms of enticing people, particularly during inclement weather, getting all those under one space, and then obviously adding other opportunities for people to remain in the town centre, to eat and drink and so forth, those elements together. So as I say, I can't provide this particular statistic that you requested, but hopefully that's an explanation of why, if you like, things have moved on, and the local plan won't have a similar policy in, because, as I say, it's no longer of its time. Thank you, Chair.
To the office at the moment, it's a reasonable number, so that will take up quite a chunk of the parking, and then you've got your shoppers and entertainment on top. There's actually two questions really. Is how many people, what's the capacity of that event space? What's the other one? I know you've given the size of it, but that I'm a bit clueless on how many people that will accommodate.
I'll do the second one first, and then Wendy can come in terms of the car parking element of it. The whole purpose of the event space is that its capacity varies, and it can vary quite dramatically depending on the event that you get. I haven't got that figure to hand. Is it in the report? Yeah, I know this is trying to pass the buck to some extent, but I know the applicant is going to obviously do the presentation shortly. He may be able to provide that information, or I might be able to provide it if I find it before then. But again, we're talking about a provision, for I'm throwing this in the air, 500 people as a maximum, for instance, to watch an event within the space. I'm sure Mr Sinton will correct me if that's not the case. But of course, other events, you won't be, they won't be audience, they'll be participatory events. Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully we can give you a figure on that. Thank you.
I've got it now. So obviously, 'cause as Graham said, there's different arrangements. So for standing, a maximum of 1,000 people. For a theatre layout, 750. If it's a cabaret style layout, 500.
I underestimated it.
Wendy, I think it's
Thank you. So there are 1,335 parking spaces now, with a loss of 67. So doing some very quick mental arithmetic on my calculator, that will leave 1,268 spaces. Where a parking survey was carried out, and even during the busy times, the maximum occupancy was 528. Yes. Well, that was when the survey was carried out in August 2021. So, yeah, well, I think we'd come back a little bit from COVID. It wasn't during the absolute lockdowns. So having said that, we obviously want to attract more people in, so we would expect the occupancy rates to be higher. But we've also got to promote sustainable transport, which we've got in abundance here. We've got the improved pedestrian routes through and to the cycle infrastructure, the tram stop 2 minutes away, the bus stops. So I think and there's also for the office workers in particular, because you mentioned those, we'll have the, like an internal cycle hub. So within the building, there'll be cycle storage, showers, drying facilities, just to encourage people to, when they do cycle to work, they can shower, change into dry clothes when they've... I can't remember. I knew you were going to ask me that. I'll just whiz through. No, it's something like 120, I think. But I'll just... yeah, it's not in the report. Yeah.
It's just a question about disability access, walking disabled or wheelchair access. Currently, the facility doesn't have much. Are we going to improve that as part of the plans? Actually accessing the building, and then once you're in the building, moving around the building?
Yes, I mean, that is an element of the actual design process as it's taken place, and the applicants have provided quite a lot of detail as part of their design and access statement, and details of how they've worked the proposals up. So again, it's, you can work your way through the building. So even if you can't use the steps to get through there, there's lift being provided to get you up that individual level, other elements of it. And of course, at the moment, because the retail elements on 2 separate floors, you have impedances and...
Is it a better lift system that we've got in place?
Yes, there will be. And again, the applicant, I'm sure, will be able to provide you with more detail how they've worked through that process.
Right. The other is accessing the actual building, because if you look at the picture there, your parking spots, where that blue car is a disabled bay, but that is the only one. A lot of people don't like going on underground car parks when they're disabled. So I'm just wondering, is there any other provision? Because it's a big trek going uphill there, in a wheelchair or walking disabled. Has that been taken into consideration? Is it?
Do you want?
On the parking side.
So there is other disabled car parking spaces within the town centre, which in Oldham it is quite hard to provide them on the flat.
Yeah.
Near the Tommyfield. I was just trying to think of a different point to mention. And then it is relatively flat to get from there to the Spindles.
It's just a concern because that is quite a fur distance.
Yeah.
Is it something that I mean, if we need to do the presentation, the parking spaces inside, it might be something we could look at.
Yeah. We've got to work with what's there,
Yeah.
obviously. So the parking spaces are where the parking spaces are within the building, and then we've got provision outside of the building. So we've got the disabled parking car park near the Tommyfield.
Yeah. How many spaces are there actually in the building?
In the building, I'm going to have to... I think you're all trying me tonight. I thought this would be the easy one tonight. So I'm looking at the number of cycle spaces, and I'll look at the number of disabled car parks.
Okay.
It was more or less on the same thing, really. It was actually welcoming the fact that the proposed workspace, market and event space have been designed to be fully accessible. And I was going to ask what features have been incorporated, as stated here. But I think you've more or less covered that, answering Councillor Cosgrove. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I thought you forgot me. You mentioned about the survey of the car parking space, and you mentioned 500 and something car park. Can you give me the timetable that you've surveyed from, and from when until when? And after 6 o'clock, when the Spindle normally closes, is the Spindles going to provide car parking after 6 o'clock till what time at night?
So we didn't carry out the survey. The Highway Authority didn't carry out the survey. That was done as part of the transportation work, as part of the planning application. So I'll look through the documents again, or the applicant, when he speaks, could potentially answer that for you. Yeah, you can, yes. The applicant's just sitting behind you. He may be able to answer that because he commissioned the applicant will have commissioned that survey. So I'll do that in tandem with that, and I'll look for that information. And the car park will be open after 6 o'clock to serve any events that take place.
My understanding of the report is that a lot of the centre is going to be open at least 10 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, it makes no sense. You know, much as we want to entice people to come using public transport, if you introduce a facility like this and people don't have ready access, which includes obviously disabled people who haven't got really the opportunity necessarily of being able to get close to facilities, it makes no sense to be able to do that. So hopefully the applicant will be able to confirm that there will be opening into the evenings, particularly when events are going, but also when other activities taking place, because you've not just got the event space, you've got other eating facilities and so forth in there, which we're looking obviously to try and enhance into the evening economy, as well as obviously during the day. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just add a slight further point, just to clarify some of the, or add the responses about parking and what have you. First of all, as Graham alluded to, you've got to bear in mind this is the town centre location, so we really want people to come in on public transport or to cycle. You know, and be careful not to overly encourage car usage by providing too much parking. I think in addition, just to clarify, in terms of the use of the car park at the moment, it is already being used by office workers, including council staff. There's already a flexi-pass system in place for council staff, and there's still plenty of capacity in the car park. Even with that. So I think in terms of the logic and where the concerns are coming from in relation to the car parking the office space that's being created, but in effect, a lot of that will be there, already being used, or already in place, because council workers already use that car park, and they will continue to use that when they move over to the Spindle Centre.
Thank you, Chair. As the ward member, which this falls into, I welcome the plans that have been put forward. But I do have a quick question, or two rather. Is one, will there be a multi-faith room for officers that
work within this building? And secondly, will there be a public multi-faith room or interfaith room for members of the public to access as well? Thank you.
So, are you gonna?
I was going to say, some of these questions might be better to ask the applicant themselves after they've spoken, and they can give the answers. Because in terms of, from a planning point of view, obviously these are all very valid and necessary concerns from yourselves as members. But from a planning point of view, we're focused on the change of use and the external changes. Because obviously any internal changes could have been done under permitted development anyway. But yeah, I think it's a valid question, and please ask that of the applicant when you get the opportunity.
I think it might be an appropriate time, seeing as we're all passing the weight onto Chris Sinton, who's speaking on behalf of the applicant, to come forward properly. I don't know whether you want to say something before.
I was planning to.
Yeah. The time limit is 3 minutes that we give people to speak.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Before I start, I just wanted to commend Mr Dickman for his comprehensive report and the presentation, which I think clearly articulates the regeneration context of the scheme and addresses most of the relevant technical aspects. The positive recommendation contained in the report is very much welcomed. With this in mind and conscious of time, I don't intend to run through the scheme proposals in minute detail, but instead just wanted to highlight the transformational effect the proposals will have on the town centre, and also illustrate the public benefits that will be secured through its delivery. Oldham is a proud town with a rich heritage, and in 2020 the council published the Creating a Better Place strategy, an ambitious and bold strategy for its transformation of the town centre, which will look to unlock significant investment, create new jobs and deliver new high quality homes. A key strand of this strategy is to support the development that contributes to creating thriving high streets and drives increased footfall for the benefit of local residents and businesses. This vision informed the Oldham Town Investment Plan, of which the redevelopment of Spindles Town Square Shopping Centre and the relocation of Tommyfield Market formed integral elements. Shaped by extensive public consultation, the application before you today seeks to deliver on those bold ambitions by creating quality and well-designed spaces, including new Grade A office accommodation and flexible co-working area. Excuse me. High quality, accessible and locally distinctive market hall, which will not only safeguard and promote the ongoing contribution of the historic Tommyfield Market, but also attract new visitors and increase footfall. A new event space that will cater for a range of events and enhance the viability and vitality of the town centre, especially outside of traditional trading hours, and an archive space to store museum, archive and library collections, which will be open to the public. As fully detailed in the officer's report, these comprehensive regeneration proposals, which reinvigorate existing buildings and reuse previously developed land in a highly accessible location, will secure a number of social, environmental and economic benefits, both during construction and operation. Chief among these benefits are direct and indirect job creation, significant financial contributions to the public purse, increased visitor numbers and local spend, and the embedding of sustainable energy measures, including renewables and biodiversity enhancement within the scheme design. These benefits weigh in favour of the proposed realignment of uses within the shopping centre and will contribute to the town centre's ongoing
30
regeneration
seconds.
and future prosperity. In closing, Spindles Town Square has been at the heart of the community for 40 years, and these proposals will ensure it remains there for many generations to come. As such, I respectfully invite members to approve this application in line with officers' recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tunstead. I don't know if you remember the questions that members were asking.
There were quite a few, yeah.
Would you like them to ask again?
Yes, please.
How are we doing it?
Just one.
Right, so mine was number of cycle spaces and the capacity of the events.
So in terms of the events, it was up to 1,000
Right.
in terms of standing. The cycle spaces, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but we have designed in a way that it increased in terms of use of cycle spaces.
Alright, so you can make it bigger if you
Yeah.
need it.
I think it's 120.
So it's an ample space, and as more people use cycles, and it all has showers and changing facilities there as well.
Okay, thank you.
I think one of the other questions questions was about people moving, particularly disabled people moving about in the centre.
Yes, it's been designed to be accessible, so that was one of the key questions that came out through the consultation process. Within the building itself, there are lifts and there are ramps as well, and it all has to be designed to new building regulations as well. So it's something we look to incorporate in the scheme development.
And I think Sir Jan asked about the facilities for prayers.
Yes, so I know there's one for staff that's proposed. In terms of the public space, I know there's a community area, so again, that's something that can be looked at in terms of the use, but I don't think it's something we've explicitly set out in the application as it currently stands, but there is ample space with the new build element, I think, to look at that.
Disabled parking bays.
Sorry?
Disabled parking bays.
Disabled parking.
Again, that's a very good question. It's in the transport assessment. I don't have the exact number to hand, but it's something I'm sure we can come back on. Sorry, I should know off the top of my head, but I don't have that.
So there are many documents that we've got for this application. If we felt that we needed to increase the number of disabled car parking spaces, that probably wouldn't be a problem, would it?
Within the existing
No, because it was just your I don't know how many currently there are. No. Right, well we can look at that. Yeah.
Is there anything
Thank you. Just in terms of, not strictly planning, but I'm intrigued to know. So, because we've talked about putting people off car use, but for Saddleworth, public transport isn't necessarily that good. How flexible would it be for electric charging, etc., to be introduced into the parking?
Yeah, it's not proposed currently, but there is always opportunity to retrofit the existing car parking space. But that isn't something that's currently being looked at as part of this scheme. But I think there are longer-term ambitions in terms of stability in town centres. But yeah, as I say, it's not something that's proposed as part of the scheme.
Sorry. Is when you're talking about disabled facilities, will there be a change in places facility?
For the cycle area?
No, for disabled people that need more enhanced change in facilities, toilet-wise. Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Right. I think we're exhausted, Mr. Tim. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dennis. If we could open the application out for general discussion for the day. If not, I will move that we accept the officer's recommendations with the conditions attached. That's second. Yeah. All those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. And now I will put the burden on the vice chair because I'll leave the room for the Thornham Mill application.
Right, we move on to item agenda number 8. Can I invite Martin Lee to give a presentation for the application, please?
Thank you very much. Yes, this application is agenda item number 8, Thornham Mill, Ouswood Road in Royton. So the application relates to a 19th century disused cotton mill, which has been vacant for a long period of time and is now, as you'll see some of the images I'll show as part of the slides, is in a particularly poor state of repair, and it's located on the northern side of Ouswood Road. So if you can see from the plan, the site itself is obviously shown with the red boundary to the northern side of Ouswood Road. It's a highly prominent location. in close proximity to a number of residential dwellings, but it's also bordered by some commercial properties to the eastern side. So the proposal itself, and the image on the screen here shows the existing situation with the large mill building, and the next slide here, just for some context, shows the same building from street view. The proposal is for the demolition of that building and its replacement with a 5-storey apartment building, which would provide 60 units, and also as part of the proposals there would be undercroft parking and the associated works. In terms of establishing the principle of development, in terms of the actual loss of the building, it firstly engages our local plan policy 14, and the reason for that is that policy aims to protect the loss of employment generating uses, and whilst the site is vacant and has been for some time, that is its last known lawful use is for such purposes. So that obviously weighs against the scheme, and there are a number of exception criteria within the policy where the loss of an employment generating use can be considered acceptable. So one of the exceptions is done through a viability exercise, and such an exercise has been completed on this site. It's been reviewed independently, and it establishes two things. Firstly, that the retention and refurbishment of that existing building or a new build, industrial or commercial scheme would be unviable in current market conditions, and that a new building conversion of the building to residential would not be viable if developer contributions are required, which I'll come on to shortly. So in favour of the demolition of the building, there has been a structural report done as part of the application, which obviously informs the viability to retain it. And that essentially found that there were structural issues, serious structural issues with the building, owing partly to water ingress over a sustained period of time, which obviously, as I said, factors into the viability of restoring the building for either a conversion to residential or to support a future other use. Also, in terms of the loss of the building's not listed. It's not in a conservation area, but it is regarded as being a non-designated heritage asset. That term is specifically referred to in the National Planning Policy Framework, and it's obviously linked into our adopted policy 24, I think it is. The site is also referred to in the recently adopted Mills strategy as having high landscape value but medium heritage value. So therefore, whilst there is harm resulting from the loss of the building, we have to consider it against the wider public benefits associated with its loss and what it could be replaced with. So if we just move through the slides, just provide some context here. So we've got the proposed site plan of the footprint of the building, and we've got some indicative sections that show the size, scale and massing of the building, and more helpfully perhaps is the elevations here. So at the top of the screen there, that's the primary elevation that would front onto Ouswood Road, to give an idea of the scale of the proposed building. In terms of the benefits of the scheme, obviously there is the provision of 60 units in this case during a period of undersupply in the borough, and it essentially provides an opportunity for the reuse of a vacant derelict site, which, as I've said earlier, is a very large building on the site currently in a very poor state of repair with structural issues that will inevitably become ever worse and present future risks. And I believe, unless I'm corrected, I think there was a recent fire at the building as well, to demonstrate some of the issues that can arise with long-term dereliction of substantial buildings. Another benefit of a scheme like this would be the construction phase and subsequent occupation and local spend by residents would have some economic benefits as well to the local area. We have had 26 objections to the scheme, and the nature of those is summarised in the report. With our consultees, the Conservation Officer's view is particularly important having regard to the loss of the building, but accepts that based on the evidence submitted with the application, which includes the viability assessment and the structural reports, that it presents the best outcome, although it is, and this was the key word, it was regrettable, because the building does have some character and is obviously it's well established and within the area and everybody knows it. The site itself is in a highly sustainable location in regards to key services and public transport options, and although it's a very large building, again just referring back to the elevations, when we're considering it in terms of its impact on its immediate surroundings, so the adjoining properties, and also its visual impact within the street scene, the starting point has to be what's on the site currently, which is a very large mill building. It's quite different to a situation where it would be a blank canvas, for example. So although there is obviously some striking differences between the heights of the existing building and the proposed building with the surrounding properties, there is nevertheless it's an established scale and massing on the site of the building that has been there for some period of time. Obviously, residential amenity is a key consideration, and there have been some amendments made to the scheme to address a number of concerns raised during the process, and that has actually resulted in a reduction in the number of units from 72 to 60. But in summary, having regard to all the scale and massing, the way it integrates with its surroundings, we do think it's acceptable on balance, having regard to the key policies in the local plan, which include 9, which is our general amenity policy, and 20, which is design, and also our housing, the loss of employment use, which I talked about at the beginning, which is policy 14, and our heritage policy, which is policy 24. There are the mill strategy I referred to did explain that there was a high value associated with landscaping, and we do have a good landscaping scheme, an indicative one. We've also got it bolstered by a condition on the recommendation, which is condition 10, to mitigate some of the impacts from the development and reduce the impact. So in summary, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out on the report, and also for the avoidance of doubt, as I mentioned as part of the viability section, there'll be no requirement for any Section 106 contributions because of the fact there's been evidence submitted that demonstrates it would make the scheme unviable. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Do any members have any questions for the officer? Yeah, Councillor Hamdani.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just checking because you just said no Section 106. The education response was no objection subject to a contribution. So that's not happening. So in that case, do they have an objection?
So the sequence that things happen, so obviously the trigger is made because of the policy we have for education. So from the initial consultee response perspective, there's a requirement for it. But obviously in terms of, we then, in practical terms, we discussed that with the developer, and they have demonstrated through an independent viability assessment that it's not viable. We can't develop the scheme and pay that commuted sum whilst it would make the scheme viable, it wouldn't happen, basically. So it's about having that evidenced. That's been done essentially, so it meets the exception.
Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to ask what the structural deficiencies were of the mill.
Yep. I haven't got the structural report in front of me, but I know there was a lot of reference made to the water ingress over a period of time. Obviously, with a building of that scale and age, you know, over a period of time, that would. I'm not a structural engineer, but I know that would cause a substantial problem and add to the costs of refurbishment. And you know, if there was an option to reuse that building that was viable, I would only think that would be the preferred option, because obviously the demolition, the costs associated with demolition and rebuild are also very, very substantial. So water ingress was the key contributor to the structural issues within the building.
Councillor Hoban.
Thank you, Chair. Just two off the objection list that's on the report. One says that the flat sizes don't meet NDSS standards, as I presume they do meet the required standards, and the other one was the access. Where is the access on the property?
So in terms of residential amenity, the scheme will meet the technical standards for providing a decent standard of accommodation. As I said, there have been some amendments made to the scheme whilst it's been in, which have reduced the number of units. In terms of the access and obviously the principal elevation is that fronts Ouswood Road. And in terms of the parking provision, do you want to come in? Just about the point around the access, yeah. Okay, that's pretty much the best plan I've got. There we go. That plan probably answers the question there. So the access point, as you can see at the far end of the site there, that's the vehicular access around the rear of the site, and you can see the access to the proposed parking spaces. So I'll get me. How do we get this little? Get the laser pointer. So the access is here. Okay.
Councillor Hamdani.
Thank you. Similarly, and I think it's procedural rather than. There's a question about heritage statement and there not being one provided. I presume that's because it was thought that one wasn't required and it's been covered presumably by the conservation officer and the mill strategy, that side of things.
Yeah, the heritage aspect of this has been covered at length. That's partly indicative for the fact it's been in for quite a period of time. That was always the crucial point. We obviously have had lengthy discussions. The conservation officer has been involved with the scheme. Used the word regrettable loss because obviously it is an attractive building at face value, but it comes with its issues, and we have to look at future uses, which has been done and proved not to be viable, and so on. So as the scheme's evolved and been amended, the conclusion is, as I've set out, really that the loss is acceptable because of the public benefits associated with the scheme as a whole.
So there wouldn't be a comeback from somebody at some point. It wouldn't be subject to challenge from somebody saying there wasn't a heritage statement. That wouldn't be an issue.
No, it wouldn't. I mean, it's not in a conservation area. It's not listed, so it's not a designated heritage asset. It's a non-designated heritage asset. That doesn't mean heritage isn't taken into account, but it's a lesser test, if that makes sense, to justify loss.
Any further questions for the officer? Councillor Costa.
Sounds very interesting. I take it that's just an underground car park, is that? And again, how many spaces will there be in that underground car park? Because people have raised that there won't be enough, and it's quite a large report, so I haven't found it yet.
So there are 61 spaces in the basement, 18 at ground floor level, including 5 accessible spaces, which gives us a total of 79 for 60 apartments. In addition to that, we have the cycle storage facility as well. You can. There is a condition where we have asked them to provide exact, precise details of it, but there will be at least 60, so there will be at least 1 per apartment. Yes.
Any other questions from members? Okay, I had a question, please. In one of the objections, it says materials proposed don't match anything in the surrounding area. Can I receive clarification in terms of the building material? It's on page 21. Will the building material be based on the existing mill colour schemes materials, or would it be matching the surrounding buildings and properties where the new building will be built? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I was just frantically trying to find the right condition there because I knew it was covered. Condition 4 covers that very point. So I won't read it all, but it says no development comprising the erection of any external walls shall take place until samples of those materials have been, I'll paraphrase this, submitted to us and agreed with the local authority. So it would be covered, but it reserves that detail for post-decision. So in other words, they'd have to come back and discharge the condition and provide details of the materials fair for us to approve. And obviously we'd make sure they were appropriate.
Any further comments or? No. Sorry, Councillor Gloucester.
Yeah, so there is a mix across the site. So we have there's 10 1-bed, 31 2-bed, 9 2-bed. So I just tot these up. They've been provided separately. So 42 2-beds and 8 3-beds.
Sorry, I'll just go to another member. Councillor Aftab Hussain, please.
So we've got to try and strike a balance between making sure that the provision of the apartments doesn't affect any demand for on-street parking on Ouswood Road, while trying to promote sustainable modes of transport. So we have got good links to public transport in the area. I've got the 2-bed apartments will have 1 space, when the 3-beds will have 2 spaces. But we haven't got any national or local parking standards, and if we did, they're likely to be maximum. So we wouldn't say every 1-bedroomed apartment would have 2 spaces, because that isn't in line with promoting sustainable modes of transport. So we've made an assessment of the site, and in this location, with the links to public transport and nearby amenities like the shopping centres in Royton District Centre, there shouldn't be a reliance on the car. But if there is, we know as local highway authority that there won't be this sudden influx of people parking on Ouswood Road and causing problems for us. Is that okay?
Councillor Holbin? No. Okay, Councillor Gloucester.
Will it all be private housing? And is there any disabled provision within the numbers?
As far as I'm aware, the scheme is all private. As I said earlier, the viability means that there won't be affordable housing provided as part of this. And in terms of the disabled provision, sorry, could you just clarify what you meant?
Disability properties, disabled access within the properties and the extra manoeuvrability room that's needed.
Okay, I think we're potentially straying into the building regulations aspect there in terms of the interior layout and the.
I just wondered if there is any provision of disabled amenity within.
Yeah, if it's a requirement of the building regulations, it would have to be provided. But that's not the kind of level of detail we would have as part of the application.
I think if I may, sorry, Chair, it's just that what you're asking is, are there any apartments designed specifically for the disabled in mind to start off with? And the answer is no. But what Mr. Lee is trying to get across is that through building regulations, there can be requirements for space standards that can mean they can be adapted in the future. And that's not what we can't control that, that's building regulations. But there's none from the outset that are ready-made for a disabled person.
Thank you. Is there any other further questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on. So I've been informed there's no speakers. Is that correct? Okay. I suppose if there's any further follow-up questions, Councillor Woodvine.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's not a question. It's just me being my usual self and saying that I think it's a monstrosity, the proposals. Of course, it's a big building and it overlooks the bungalows, which I don't like. And the mill's a big building, we all know that. But the mill's been there for hundreds of years and predates the bungalows. And nobody lives in the mill. It's pointless having policies and strategies, because we rely on the developers putting the proposals forward to us. So regardless of what we say is preferable in a plan or anything else, it relies on the developers putting forward proposals. And if it's not viable, it's not viable, is it? So there's nothing we can do, really. We can only judge what they put before us. And we often contradict our own policies. So that's my piece. It was very short, not very sweet, but I don't like it, so I'm not supporting it.
Any further comments? Yeah, Peter, sorry.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, I mean, first of all, let's be careful not to conflate the issues. In terms of viability, that comes down to, that affects things like whether we can provide affordable housing, whether we can provide education contributions and what have you, and obviously whether what use the building could be put to, whether it could be reused in the first place. So let's not conflate that with the actual affecting the design of what is now proposed. In terms of that design, what we have to bear in mind is that, as you say, the mill is already there, and so that's the starting point we're assessing from. And as long as we're comfortable that the new building is not significantly changing the mass of that building and affecting residential properties significantly more than the current building, then that's reasonable, you know, because what's there now, as you say, is already overshadowing the surrounding properties. It's not full of people, I appreciate that, but again, there are standards, and by and large in this development, the distance standards from habitable room to habitable room are being met, and again, are certainly no worse than the current situation with the mill building if it was in use for employment, for example. So I think we've got to bear that in mind. I understand your opinion on the design, and design is subjective, but we are comparing to an existing building when you're talking about the scale and massing and overlooking.
Thank you, Peter. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Gloucester. Yeah, I think if the office can just, yeah, there we go.
That's not very good, is it? We can't see it.
There wasn't more graphic one at the start. Can we zoom in on the picture?
No, there isn't a photo montage one. See if I can zoom.
Just while Martin's looking, yeah, that's, you know, in terms of the plans that an applicant has to provide, it's only things like elevations. Not every applicant will do a montage, for example, like we did with Spindles.
Sorry, can I just come in there? Just to clarify, Martin, you know where the pink line is that the entrance to the properties? With that big tree is on the left? I think that's a tree anyway.
It's a very good question. I can see. Do you know? It must be. Yes, it will be.
I think the pink line, in terms of the plan, it's not very clear. It's clearer on the other one, actually. It's trying to show where the existing building is. But you're right, in terms of where that pink line was coming down is where the access road is, yes.
Any further comments or questions? Yep, Councillor Hamdani.
I totally understand why in the law viability means we don't get any money for education, but in this case the law's an ass, but that's the law.
I just want to remind members that it's live recording. Yeah. Any further questions? I'll open it up for further debate. No? Okay. Can I ask someone to put forward the motion? Yep. Second? Yep. All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that we're on item number 9, which is Vesticare Stadium, White Bank Road. And is it Mr. Lee?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks very much, Chair. So yes, this is item number 9, the Vesticare Stadium on White Bank Road in Oldham. And the reason for bringing this to committee, the council owns at least part of this overall site, so that triggers the requirement to bring it to committee. So the application relates to part of the overall Vesticare Stadium site, and you'll see from the aerial image here the wider site, and then on with the obviously the pitch facilities and the associated facilities just to the top of that plan. But you'll see from the site boundary here, the red line, which is, if I just get the laser pointer, which is in the centre of this plan here, that red line here is the extent of the application site. So, in other words, the application's contained within that red line boundary. So the application itself to retain a mobile catering van and the provision of sheltered and outdoor seating areas, as well as 2 storage containers on the site. So for some context here, we've got the covered seating area here with the food truck here, which I'll show a separate slide next, and then the outdoor seating area adjacent, and then the 2 storage containers within the site. So the food truck, which is under the cover of the covered area, is as is shown on this plan here, and it's essentially a converted steel container located on the bed of a truck, with its side elevation undercover but facing the seating area that you saw on that plan. And then that is adjacent to an additional outdoor seating area. So all component parts of the application are enclosed within the stadium grounds by the Paladin fencing, and within the grounds the development is largely enclosed by timber fencing, and its gated entrance adjacent to the ticket booth. One important consideration with this application is the site is located within the green belt, and that is extremely important as a starting point to determine whether the principle of the development is acceptable or not. So this engages policy 22 in our local plan, which is somewhat reliant on the guidance in the National Planning Policy Framework. Having regard to that, it's considered that the storage containers on the site, which are understood to be used for storage of sports equipment associated with the wider use, are not considered to be inappropriate development because they fall within the exceptions to that within the National Planning Policy Framework. However, the actual catering truck and the associated covered seating areas, which hopefully you can just see on the photographs here, do represent inappropriate development in the green belt, and it's important for me to set out at the start, at least, is that inappropriate development, according to the NPPF, is harmful by definition. That does not mean it cannot be accepted. The test is whether if there are very special circumstances present that can only be present if the harm to greenbelt and other harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations. So in plain English, what we're looking at is whether the impact of the development on the site in terms of impact on openness and its visual impact, we have to consider give a weighting to that harm, and then we have to give a weighting to any known benefits of the scheme. So the actual impact is, and I'll explain why I use the term rather limited. It is adjacent to other buildings. It's relatively small scale compared to this overall size of the site. And it's also important to highlight that the recommendation, at least, which you'll see from the conditions, is for a temporary consent for 3 years in order to assess the impact, particularly in regards of residential amenity. But just sticking with the principle, we consider that the community benefits from the development and the limited impact does, and that also takes into account harm that could be caused to residential amenity, ecology and highway safety, etc. Those all have a weighting of harm, but we consider they are outweighed by the community benefits from the development, and therefore the principle we think is acceptable, particularly having regard to the temporary nature of the development through the condition attached to the recommendation. Also, environmental health officers and the highway engineers have raised no objection to the application. That is subject to the imposition of the conditions on the recommendation as well. We do recognise there are a number of objections, 9 in total, that have been made to the application across a spectrum of many issues, many of which, importantly, relate to the wider use of the site and its existing use or uses outside the red line boundary you can see on the site there. And it's important for me just to emphasise that some of those, at least, cannot be given any or very limited weight in the assessment of this application. So we're not looking at the overall use of the site. We're simply looking, in this case, at the retrospective nature of the food truck, the outdoor storage, and the storage containers. So some of the objections that have been raised, are relevant and have weight in the consideration of this application. So those would include matters such as the appearance of the food truck and fears about additional demand for parking, and concerns about residential amenity from the operational hours, for instance. So we have concluded, in summary, that the application is acceptable, and we have recommended it for approval, but notably subject to a 3-year time limit in which the permission would then expire, unless there's been a subsequent application to extend it that's been accepted. So that's the brief summary, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Has anybody got any questions to the officers? Councillor Alan Darnay.
I was quite intrigued. The second point on the food truck for the exemption from the green belt, where it talks about COVID-19 and that need for flexibility that was caused is not necessarily required now, but it's shown the potential for that. Has there been any sort of I know we talked about precedent previously, but precedent for that in other planning applications? Is it something where kind of that principle has been established elsewhere? Are we setting a principle in terms of that, which, you know, what's the...
Yeah, so obviously with the COVID and
position and the planning response to it, there were temporary provisions to promote outdoor uses and help viability of a number of businesses. Going forward, obviously, we're looking at this purely in principle, at least, in greenbelt terms. So, as I said, we really just have to assess the level of harm that arises from this development, and then looking at it in terms of whether that harm is outweighed by other considerations. So each case is on its own merits, as you know. So no two cases, although may appear identical, every two cases are always different. But we're not setting a precedent here. So there, I can't think of any off the top of my head where they've been similar to this. And but if it is approved, it wouldn't necessarily mean that a similar application elsewhere would automatically just sail through.
Yeah, just to come in and add to that a little bit, in terms of if there's been precedents set elsewhere already, I'm not aware of any per se. I think we're still in that realm of time where we're learning from COVID-19 and how we react to things. I think the key point to make is that the very special circumstances aren't based upon COVID-19. They're using COVID-19 as an example. To quote the report, it says how COVID-19 has highlighted the need for businesses to have the facilities available to adapt quickly to changing circumstances so they can survive. So I think, just to be clear, it's not because of COVID-19. It's just that's a example of why there's flexibility needed.
Thank you, Chair. I can't see the greenbelt part of this. There's a football pitch, there's a club, there's car park. Exactly where is the greenbelt that we're talking about?
I think if you looked at the wider site, you'd find out that it attached to the golf course, which attaches to the Woodhouse greenbelt.
Right. Well, if I may, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, greenbelt is a bit of an odd policy sometimes. But first of all, foremost, it is a policy. It's not necessarily about the state of the land. It's a policy designation covering an area saying over this area that's a designated green belt, there are restrictions on development. And so historically, the site of the Vesticare Stadium has still been included in the green belt and has never been removed from it. Therefore, we have to apply the policy to it. Even though, as you say, substantial parts of the site are quite, or what we would call brownfield, probably, aren't we? Well, say green belt is a policy, so it's not. It doesn't. Just because it's green belt doesn't mean it can't be brownfield too.
I just wondered if it was like a tiny triangle. But...
No, it does form a coherent green belt if you looked at the whole map, and albeit it is right on the fringe and edge of it. Yeah, Councillor Sturgeon.
Thank you, Chair. Just had a quick question. On page 43, it mentions that there's some badger sets that were found. I know you mentioned they're not going to be disturbed, but I'm just worried that obviously if the containers are there and if members of the public or people using the facility are kind of in close vicinity of the badgers, then would that disturb them, and how can we ensure this is limited? Thank you.
Yeah, well, but obviously from what you've seen here, the proposal, well, I can't call it a proposal, it's a retrospective development in the main part. So We have consulted with the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, and there's a section in the report on ecology that does refer to the issue that you raised, and essentially they have no objection to the application. But it is obviously a material consideration that's been considered as part of the process.
So if, for example, they're found in breach of disturbing those badges, can we revoke the, or what the kind of penalties that we can enforce?
Yeah, so badgers are a protected species, so obviously any willful damage to their habitats or to themselves would be a criminal offence. Obviously, with a slightly different hat on, if the council being an owner of the site, if it became known that there was an issue, a criminal offence being taking place on its land, I'm sure there would be a very quick response from our estates department. I think it would be fair to say. Yeah.
Is there anybody, Councillor Gloucester? It actually is already there, as I understand it, in situ.
Yeah, and obviously in terms of the condition that we're proposing would be on this permission, it would be temporary for a 3-year period. But in terms of what you're saying, yes, for that 3-year period, yes, that truck would be there, parked permanently.
I'm just not getting this, because you can have a building on skids, can't you, that you don't need planning permission for, even on greenbelt land. So I don't understand what we're sort of talking about here, to be honest, because it's a truck, isn't it? Can be, or is it in the state that it's not able to move?
Well, it's the fact that it's not just the fact that it's a truck; it's the change of use. It's creating that catering area and that seating area for the eating of food and drink as well. But no, Martin, you come in on the actual truck point.
Yeah, I mean, there's we're looking at the whole scheme as a whole, not just itemising elements, with the exception of how we have to assess it against Greenbelt. But you can see from the image there, that's the truck, which is a converted container on the bed of a truck. But you can see there's a degree of permanence from it, in respect of it being a building. So it does require permission as part of the overall scheme. Yeah. Yes, we've got. So I'll just see if the photos answer the question better than. Just bear with me. So yes, you can see the seating area at the front. That's the covered seating, and I'll put this in context by showing the site plan in a moment, and the outdoor seating area. Just give some context. Is the image on screen here. And then just to provide the plan that shows all the seating area, that's the outdoor seating area here. Covered area is the hatch lines, which is this area here, and then you've got the food truck underneath there, which is obviously underneath the roof.
If there's no further questions, if we could go into comments, and anybody want to debate at Councillor Oldham?
Yeah, just I know people won't believe this, but a couple of years ago I had a special birthday at this venue. I won't tell you, it was a 0 birthday, I'll let you guess which one. But it's a very good community function place, this place. You've got the football pitch and you've got quite a large room. And I think the thing that was missing to a certain extent when I had an event was the opportunities to have hot food and that kind of thing. And I think it really it will help the facility monetary wise, I would imagine, but it will also add to the viability of the place and the vibrance of the place, I think. So I think it's a really good thing for the area.
Councillor Alan Darnay.
It was actually slightly in response to Councillor Surgeon, just with regards to the badges, because I had concerns about that coming in. And what was stated was that there was no objection. In the report, it's actually more strident than that. It says there will be no impact on the badges. It wasn't just that, you know, that it wasn't going to necessarily cause too much of a problem. It was literally no impact was the way it was stated.
Has anybody else got any other observations or comments? Councillor Gloucester?
Where's all the parking for this then? Is it in that picture that's seen? I can't see where the parking would be. Or is it that little bit there at the side? You know?
There's obviously, at the introduction to the application, I did explain that the red line boundary on this plan here contains everything that's proposed as part of the application. So obviously it's got a wider use across the wider site, and there is existing parking provision at the fronts, which is in the area here. There's no proposals to change that I'm aware of. So it's existing parking provision serving the wider site, albeit it falls outside the red line boundary. So in short, there's no parking provision proposed, additional parking provision proposed associated with this application.
Just to clarify as well, I mean, just so we're not misunderstanding what we're considering here, this isn't, you know, we're not talking about an application for a restaurant which creates its own additional usage. This is a catering area associated with the event that would take place at the facility. So there's even a condition restricting the use of this to event days that we've proposed. So it's not about creating additional people coming to the site. It's those who are already coming for another reason, and they will be able to get food and drink while they're there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know whether Councillor Horbin was proposing approval, but if he was, I'll second it to move things along. All right, well, I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Any further comments before we go to the vote? If not, it's been moved and seconded that we approve this. All those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. We will then move to the next item, which is again a retrospective application for a very large building, which is adjacent to the Beever Mill on Shaw Road, Brighton. And if I could ask Mr. Lee to outline the application.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yeah, this is agenda item number 10 and relates to Beever Mill on Shaw Road in Royton, as you said, Chair. So this site is located to the east of Shaw Road and to the west of Lane Mill. And it is in close proximity to, as you can see from the plan there, it is in close proximity to some residential units on Penthorne Drive and Turfland Avenue. So the site is currently occupied by Patterson and Rothwell for injection moulding and plastic moulding type uses, which essentially forms a general industrial type use, which falls within what we call use class B2. And the site also includes a number of large buildings, its service yard, car park, and a number of silos adjacent to Shaw Road, where a vehicular access point is located in that position, as you'll see from the photographs as part of the slides. So the application is made on a retrospective basis, as has been pointed out, to retain a storage building that's been provided within the yard area along the western part of the site. And so what we've done in terms of the slides, we've got a pre-existing site layout that shows the frontage of the site. So the access point from Shaw Road is approximately in this position up here, just off the plan. And then the current site layout shows the building in orange here that's been erected. So it has been erected without planning permission, just to be absolutely clear about this. That cannot affect the way that the application's assessed. We still have a statutory responsibility to assess it against the relevant policies in our local plan, having regard to other material planning considerations. So there is a risk that's been taken, if you like, from the developer in doing it without permission, but the way that the committee has to assess it is if it were a proposal. The only benefit of having it on a retrospective basis is that you can see exactly what it looks like when I show you the photos in a moment. So in terms of the size, it's 60 metres in length and 20 metres in depth, and has an overall height of just under 7 metres, and is faced in PVC panels. We've got the elevations here, which if it's approved, will form part of the approved plan schedule. And this aerial view probably gives the best context of the proposal. So the building in question is the building I'm just circling with my arrow here. And the next photograph here shows the position from the entrance. So it's the building in the foreground, sorry, in the background, which you can see in white at the back of the site. So we have had 7 objections received from residents to this building, and they're all obviously covered in the report in more detail and summarised. In terms of the assessment of the application, in terms of the principle, the site is located, it forms part of a business employment area with allocation within the local plan. And it's these locations where commercial and industrial type developments are best suited and are directed to. And it's obviously a well-established employment generating site in this location that predates many of the houses that surround it. Nevertheless, we still have to consider the impact on residential amenity as part of the application. We have consulted Environmental Health and Highways. Neither have any objection to the application. You can see from the image here, if I perhaps zoom in a little, just provide a bit more context. Building is well screened from many of the residential properties that surround the site. The closest built properties on Turfland Avenue are around about 40 metres away from the building. And the scale and nature of the building, as you can see and appreciate from that image, it is in keeping with the surroundings. It's not something that you would not expect to find in a commercial setting. And essentially, we don't consider there would be such harm to residential amenity that would justify anything other than a positive recommendation. And in summary, therefore, we believe the application is acceptable and the recommendation is to approve, Chair. Thank you.
Is there any questions at all? Yes, Councillor Woodbine.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's not a question. I've just realised as we were looking at the application that I am a friend of the Rothwell, who is one of the owners of the business. So although I'm not too closely associated with him, I should probably declare the interest now.
Thank you. Councillor Sergeant.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask for clarification? So is it just a long extended building, or is it including the 2 smaller buildings at the top as well? Thank you.
It is just the rectangular building, the single one on the plan. I'll just confirm that by showing the site plan here. So it's this building here, and the adjacent ones that you referred to on the image are here. So they're not part of it. It's just the single building here.
And just to ask again, sorry, is it made out of metal or is it made out of brickwork? Because it looks kind of metal.
It's clad in PVC insulated panels. So I'll put the photos back on. Yeah, so in terms of its appearance, it's reflective of the adjacent buildings. It's extremely well screened from many public vantage points and from the neighbouring properties. So we didn't have any concerns on a design. It's more functional rather than appreciated for its aesthetics.
In terms of the cladding, does it meet standards, the minimum standards in terms of fire safety and everything? Because obviously they've done it without permission, so I'm just concerned that cladding and all the kind of interior material may pose a potential fire or hazard risk.
Again, I think we're perhaps straight into building regulations requirements here, which is a separate matter to the planning application. Obviously, that's a separate issue that they will need to ensure they've complied with the relevant building regulations, but we can't give weight to building regulations in assessing the planning application.
Is there any other comments that anybody would like to make? It's a shame that this is retrospective when you consider it such a very significant building. Having said that, the officer's recommendation is clearly approval with with conditions. So I will move that. If that's seconded. Second. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. Oh, sorry. Thank you. The next item, which is number 11, is number something. I'll have to wear my glasses. 6 Pole Lane, Failsworth, and this is change of use to a house in multi-occupation. Mr. Lee.
Thank you again, Chair. So yeah, this is agenda item number 11, 6 Pole Lane in Failsworth. So this is a site that's located close to the junction with Manchester Road, and as you can see from the image here, it's got Manchester Road at the corner of that plan, and the building in question is the second building in on this terrace here, which you'll see on the next plan here, which shows the site in red, and I'm just now found out how to zoom in. I'll keep zooming in on things. So that's the location of the property. The application itself is for a change of use from its current use as a dwelling house, a single dwelling house, to a 7-bedroom, 9-person house in multiple occupation. And there's also a proposal for a single-storey. So it was called in to committee by Councillor Briggs, who'd made representations on the application, who raised concerns about the proliferation and concentration of HMOs in the surrounding area. It is in a highly sustainable location. It is in an existing residential area, and simply it's not considered by officers to be an incompatible use in this particular location. The standard of accommodation, we do have a slide showing the floor plans, proposed floor plans here. The accommodation that's proposed does meet the council's adopted HMO standards. We've had no objections to the application from any of the consultees, subject to the conditions that are on the recommendation. And as to the best of my knowledge, we've had no objections from any neighbours as well. So the proposed extension to the rear is very small in scale, and space is maintained within the site, as you can see, for bin storage and also for cycle storage, which are commonly requested for such uses, particularly where no off-street car parking provision is possible or proposed. And in short, again, Chair, the application is recommended for approval.
Has anybody got any comments or observations? Councillor Oldham.
Well, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the area is a conservation area, and there are a number of HMOs on the same row. Does the conservation area not have any pull or sway on this? Failsworth Pole is a historical conservation area. Does that not?
Yeah, the conservation area is obviously the reason for their designation as that is often the quality of the buildings and the historic nature of how a site has evolved over time to protect those key features. a HMO is simply a type of residential accommodation, and whilst it requires planning permission, sorry, let me just rewind slightly there. Up to change the existing house for up to 6 people living together as a single household, so a HMO for 6 people, doesn't require planning permission. So this requires planning permission because it's obviously a slightly larger HMO with 7 bedrooms intended for 9 people. So in terms of you addressing the question, I think only very limited weight could be given to the fact it's in a conservation area. It is a type of residential accommodation in a residential area, and we've got no reason to suggest that the proposed use would be harmful to the conservation area.
Councillor Alan.
Thank you. Just with regards to the shrubs that were removed, and it refers in the statement to a planned hedge to replace it. Is that something that should kind of go into the planning, the attached conditions, so that it's not just a suggestion, it's a, no, that should happen? And is that reasonable to do?
Yeah, obviously, when we're looking at using conditions, which is for most approvals, we do have, as you'll know, we have certain tests that are needed to basically. Conditions have to be reasonable in scale and nature and what they're requiring, having regard to adopted policies. So with the fact that this is primarily a change of use with an extension at the rear, I would suggest that it wouldn't be reasonable or proportionate to have a condition requiring it, but it's something that we could, perhaps relay to the applicant to consider. But the committee may disagree with my opinion on that.
Councillor Owen.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Another question about the parking. Obviously, this is a row of terraced houses on a very busy street, and in an area of terraced houses on really busy streets with cars parked on the road. What's the significance there? What's the highways report? Because I know there's no objection from the highways officer, but if we're getting 7 to 9 people in a terraced house, no matter how many cycle sheds you build and how many times you ask them to ride a bike, how many cars are you looking at with this? And that's going to be detrimental to the area again, isn't it?
Councillor Surge, we'll take Councillor Surge as well. And then
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to share Councillor Hamdani's point about the shrubbery. If we can, I don't know if legal needs to come into it, but if we can attach it as a condition, I think that'd be agreeable for most of us.
Okay, we could address those. That'd be great.
Okay, so with regard to the parking again, you know exactly what I'm going to say now. We don't have any local or national parking standards, and if we did, we wouldn't be saying, well, there are 9 people that could live in that house, so we need 9 spaces. We'd have a maximum for the type of house, and it would probably be 2 or 3, but because that would be a maximum, it wouldn't matter if there were none. So we'll start the discussion from that point. In this particular area, there are double yellow lines for most of the length on each side and single yellow on the other side. So anybody moving in would know that if they want to own a car, they're not going to be able to park outside. So in that respect, we deal with it in exactly the same way as we do with every other terraced house on that street. It's in a sustainable location with good public transport links with Metrolink and the buses, and there is access to a wide range of amenities. So that's how I've had to assess it.
In regard to the bushes, I think that in this particular case, we'd be better trying to get that done by agreement, because, albeit you can't see it, we've got the map up of the other houses, and some have a hedge at the front. Some don't have any hedge at all. And I think trying to put it as a condition enforced, it would be very, very difficult. For instance, next door doesn't have any hedge at all. You know, it's just a straightforward garden, and it's the same, I think, with number 8 as well. So I think I think that certainly we can try to encourage them to do it, but I think it'd be very difficult to enforce a condition on it. Yeah.
Chair, perhaps as a compromise, we could have it attached as an informative to a decision note, not prejudging the outcome of the application, obviously, but if it is approved, we could attach an informative rather than a condition, so it's stated on the decision notice.
Very good. Yes. That's a good compromise, I think. Yeah. Has anybody else got any comments or anything? The officer's recommendation is clearly to approve it. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry. Yes, and you've been sat there for an hour and 3/4. So, yeah. It's Rihanna Thompson, is it? Yeah. You do have 3 minutes to address the committee, and they'll ask any questions.
Chair. Members, I'm here this evening to speak on behalf of my client, Mr Blum of Riverside Solutions, in favour of the proposal for a change of use from residential class C3 to a 7-bedroom HMO. In the short time available, I'd like to remind the committee of the matters that should probably be at the heart of making a decision today. Excuse me. I trust you will make your decision favourably and support the Planning Officer's recommendation for approval. The proposal, as shown in the Planning Officer's report, is fully compliant with the development plan and has received no objections during the determination period. It will not cause harm to the conservation area. There has been no local opposition to the proposals, which will create much needed bedrooms in a highly sustainable location. Whilst concerns surrounding a lack of parking have been raised, this is not shared by the Highways Authority or Development Plan Policy, which class this as a very highly accessible location. Indeed, the lack of on-street parking in the vicinity renders the property unfavourable for families and ideally suited to professional working tenants occupying a HMO such as this. The challenging target set by the government in regards to housing gives reason to believe that HMOs can be considered an important contribution to local housing supply whilst maintaining good living standards. The application proposes sustainable development in accordance with the Development Plan Policy, which increases housing supply, optimises housing potential and creates good quality and affordable accommodation. Riverside Solutions is a keen supporter of providing high-end and well-managed HMO accommodation and has devoted the last years building and managing HMOs in the area. I note there's no presumption against HMOs in Failsworth and no Article 4 direction exists. This is an indication that the number of HMOs in Failsworth is not at present considered to be enough to justify presumption against this type of development. As such, my client, as mentioned, can pursue an HMO for up to 6 people without planning permission, regardless of the decision today. This application seeks 1 additional bedroom over and above that threshold. Therefore, the principle of a change of use to HMO should not be a factor in today's decision. It's very important that the committee understand that the HMO will be converted to a high specification to attract professional working tenants. There's a high demand for this type of accommodation, in this area due to its excellent location, close to amenities and public transport links. All tenants will be vetted and identity checked prior to acceptance, and their
30 seconds.
Their tenancy agreement will contain clauses to discourage excessive noise and other forms of antisocial behaviour. The property will be professionally managed and with regular inspections, cleaning of communal areas and tidying of the yard, and ensuring bins are regularly put out for refuse collection. I would therefore urge the committee to consider this and the additional urge the committee to consider this and support a wholly sustainable proposal when coming to a decision. And excuse the frog in my throat. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We've asked a lot of questions already. I don't know whether anybody is. Councillor Hoban.
I think the person next to you knew I was going to be asking questions, didn't you, Peter? This isn't the first of Mr Blum's properties within this very close vicinity, is it? And I noticed that you said there was no local opposition, but on one of his previous ones there was a lot of opposition. I think this one's gone under the radar to a certain degree. I'd like to ask why in this property, and he hasn't done in his other properties that he bought, why is he stretching it over so it needs planning application? Why are you going for the extra bedroom? I disagree with the fact that of the parking, and I know Wendy says everything policy-wise and official-wise, but there is problems with parking on Pole Lane and people from Pole Lane parking on other streets in the area. And I'm very strange how it can be classed as high demand in the area when I know that the other HMOs, particularly ones owned by Mr Blum, I think are still under-occupied or under full occupation at this moment in time. So I don't know where the high demand comes in, but I'd like to know why you're going for the extra bedroom here, and why. I don't suppose it's an issue for the committee, but Mr Blum seems to want to buy every terraced house in Failsworth and turn it into an HMO.
I can only comment on
I think some of those questions were not particularly associated with planning, but if you could pull out what you feel is appropriate to the planning process, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair. I can only comment on this application that's here in front of you today, and I think the reasoning behind the additional bedroom for this property was due to its highly accessible location. It's highly sustainable and very close to amenities and great transport links into Manchester, etc. for work. So I think it's that need coupled with, and this is referred to in the planning statement, the need for bedrooms in the area. There's a very high demand for this area in the hundreds compared to a provision of bedrooms which is in the tens. So there's a mismatch at the moment between demand and need, and this would address that. In terms of parking, I think that's already been referenced. There's no parking, and even if another tenant or family or owner moved in tomorrow, there wouldn't be any parking. And as the Highways Authority, Highways officers mentioned, that would be enforced as per the status quo, and there's no change there. This is proposing cycle storage, secure cycle storage, to try and encourage sustainable transport. And I think given, slightly off tangent and my own view, but given the type of person that would occupy this HMO, possibly more likely to own a cycle, a bike rather than a car. So hopefully that addresses your points on bedrooms and demand and parking, but I can only comment on this application here today.
Is there any further observations or any further questions to the applicant representative? No? Okay, thanks very much indeed. If we could go into a general discussion, if anybody wants to make any comments, please do so. Councillor Owen.
Yeah, I think people will be aware of my comments, and I refute the high demand. As I've said, there's HMOs on that very stretch of terrace houses at the moment that are under full occupation, so I don't know where the high demand comes from. I'm going to propose to refuse this application on the grounds that, I mean, it will go ahead under the planning application threshold, even if we refuse it, won't it? Probably. Or can we knock it out completely? Because it's in a conservation area. There's multiple HMOs that are lying empty at the moment, and whilst the applicant says he's looking for professional people, we wonder what threshold that will. And I know that's not a planning issue, but
could I turn your mind to planning issues?
Yes.
If you're moving refusal, it has to be refused on planning issues.
Well, I would do it on the what options have I got?
And that's the dilemma when we're faced with any application for HMOs.
Can we refuse it on the lack of demand? Can we refuse it on the parking facilities? Can we refuse it on? Can I have advice?
In a sense, no, because you're proposing a recommendation for refusal. You need to come up with the reasons. But I think in terms of a lot of the issues you've outlined, obviously we as officers have discussed them, responded to your comments, and so our recommendation as officers still stands. So it's obviously difficult for us as officers then to turn around and suggest reasons for refusal to you, and we don't agree with them. So, but yeah, and I think just one further point to clarify as well. I mean, actually, you've referred to need, and is there a need for this? Ultimately, that's not an issue for us in planning at this point in time, because one, other than no disrespect meant by this, Councillor Hoban, as you know, but all we have is your say on that at the moment about whether they're under occupied. There's no evidence before this committee about need and demand and vacancy rates and HMOs in the area at the moment. But also, you know, it's still the principle of simply converting from one residential type to another residential type. And if there's no harm through that, need is irrelevant.
Having said that, it has been moved, albeit without particular reason that it's refused. I don't know whether it had to be seconded. No. It doesn't appear as though people are keen to second that. So, that being the case, could I move that we approve it with the conditions attached to it? Sorry.
Is that with the informative attached as well?
Sorry, yes, yes, yeah. Is that seconded? Yeah, thank you. All those in favour? Those against? 1. Those abstaining? 3, 4, 5.
I voted for it.
Sorry?
I was voting for it. I was pointing after.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Just to clarify that.
Right. Sorry. 4 abstentions. Thank you. So therefore it's approved. If we move on to the next 2 applications, which we'll take together, and that's at 12 and 13, they are the same application. One is just for the planning permission and one's for the listed building consent. So if the presentation is done jointly, and then we would have to have 2 votes on it anyway. So Mr. Lee.
Thanks, Chair. Just sorting the presentations out. So yes, as you'd mentioned, there's 2 applications here that I'll introduce together, but we will need 2 independent decisions. So essentially, this is an application at 1 Lower Tunstead on Tunstead Lane in Greenfield. So agenda item number 12 is a householder planning application for the single-storey rear extension that's proposed. And item 13 is the associated listed building consent. So the scheme, the site is, as you can see on the plan here, edged in red, and it's been referred to committee given that the applicant is a relative of Councillor Graham Sheldon. So it's purely obviously for transparency reasons. So the application itself is for a single-storey rear extension to what is currently a 2-storey semi-detached Grade 2 listed house. There have been a number of recently refused applications on this site and subsequent appeal decisions that have been dismissed, but those all included 2-storey elements in terms of the size and scale of the extensions. Given that the harm caused to the historic value of the listed building, essentially. So for the purposes of the planning application, the site is located in the Greenbelt, but as you can see from the proposed plan here, the extension that's proposed is far reduced from previous applications and is relatively small scale in its size and design. And importantly, it's not regarded as being a disproportionate extension to the original building, and that's important in Greenbelt terms because that means that it's not considered to be inappropriate development. So therefore, the actual principle of the development is acceptable. Having regard to its size, design, its impact on adjoining residents and so on, largely because of its size, it's an extremely limited impact. The Conservation Officer has looked at this from the heritage point of view and agrees that the reduced scale of it compared to previous applications is now at a point that is acceptable because for the purposes of the listed building consent application, the assessment is slightly different to the planning application. It's set out in the report, but it's basically about preserving the building and any kind of special architectural or historic interest. So the fact that this is a much smaller extension that obscures far less of the rear elevation of the building, the Conservation Officer has no objections to this version, and both applications are recommended for approval. Thank you.
Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Woodburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've seen this one. Well, to start with, all I can say is finally we've got an acceptable proposal. I think I've seen it 3 times while I've been on this committee, and a few times before that on the Parish Council's Planning Committee, and I'm sick of seeing it. So I'm really pleased that we finally got a proposal we're happy with, and as the member who's been consistently in favour of approving this, please can I have the pleasure of proposing approval today?
And yeah, and I'll be very pleased to. I will be very pleased to wave goodbye, because I think it's been 5 or 6 times it's been before us. Yeah. Has anybody got any comments at all regarding it? No. Okay. If we could move to the vote then. Firstly, we move into the planning application element of it. So it's been moved and seconded. Those in favour? Thank you. And we'll have to have another vote now on the listed consent application. Those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. The final item is an appeals update, which has been and is before you. I don't know whether anybody's got any comment, it's just for noting. If not, thanks very much indeed for your attendance and patience. And we'll see you on the 27th, I think it is, isn't it, the next one?
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.